The enigma of power before the world knew him as a billionaire. Before the gold towers, the TV cameras, the rallies, and the White House, there was just a boy from Queens, a boy whose name would one day echo through every newsroom on Earth. But long before President Trump, there was Donald John Trump, a restless child in a world of privilege and pressure. This is the story of the man before politics, how he became the person who would reshape American power, challenge global diplomacy, and redefine leadership itself, all without ever truly changing who he was inside. In this episode, we explore the unseen chapters of Donald Trump's early life, the forces that shaped him, the mentors who guided him, and the challenges that built his ambition. Because to understand his rise, we must first go back to where it all began. Donald John Trump was born on June 14, 1946, in Jamaica Hospital, Queens, a post-war America bursting with confidence and construction. His father, Fred Trump, was already a well-known name in New York's outer boroughs. He was a builder, not of skyscrapers, but of neighborhoods. During the Great Depression and World War II, Fred had mastered the art of survival through real estate, developing thousands of homes for returning veterans. He was precise, frugal, obsessed with efficiency. Fred believed in the American dream, but only for those willing to fight for it. And at home, he expected the same discipline from his children that he demanded from his construction crews. Fred's mantra was simple: be tough, be smart, and never lose. He passed that lesson to his fourth child, Donald. His mother, Mary Ann MacLeod Trump, brought another dimension to the household. Born in Scotland, she had crossed the Atlantic at 18, chasing opportunity and stability. She was elegant, quiet, deeply religious, the emotional anchor in a sea of ambition. Young Donald grew up in a home of contradictions, the warmth of his mother's faith versus the cold logic of his father's empire. He admired power, but sought affection. He saw wealth, but longed for recognition. By age 10, he was already challenging authority, turning every rule into a negotiation. Fred noticed. He saw potential and danger. So he made a decision that would define his son's adolescence. If Donald was to become a man worthy of the Trump name, he needed structure. He needed discipline. And there was only one place to find it: the New York Military Academy. The Military Academy years in 1959, at just 13 years old, Donald Trump arrived at the gates of the New York Military Academy, a fortress of discipline nestled in the Hudson Valley. For Fred Trump, this wasn't punishment, it was preparation. He believed his son would learn loyalty, endurance, and most importantly, control. The academy demanded order. Wake before sunrise, polish every shoe until it shines, follow the chain of command without question. But young Donald was not like the others. He didn't just want to obey the rules. He wanted to master the system. He excelled in sports, baseball and soccer, not for the joy of the game, but for the taste of victory. Former classmates would later recall, "You could tell he wanted to win, even when it didn't matter. He needed to be on top." The academy gave him what ordinary schools couldn't: a battlefield where his competitive nature was rewarded, not punished. By the time he graduated in 1964, Donald Trump had become the embodiment of discipline on the surface and defiance underneath. He learned that respect could be commanded through strength and weakness could never be shown. He left the academy not humbled, but hardened, convinced that leadership meant control, and control meant winning. Next, the young cadet from Queens sets his eyes on the world's greatest stage, Manhattan, university and ambition. After years of military discipline, Donald Trump was ready for a different kind of battlefield, one of ambition and influence. In 1964, he entered Fordham University, but 2 years later transferred to the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, one of America's most prestigious business schools. At Wharton, Trump immersed himself in economics, real estate finance, and urban development. But more than theory, he studied perception. He learned that in business, confidence was a currency. An image could be more powerful than numbers. One classmate later recalled, Donald wasn't there to learn. He was there to observe power. During these years, he visited Manhattan often, walking down Fifth Avenue, staring up at skyscrapers, and imagining his name in gold at the top. In 1968, he graduated with a degree in economics and an unshakable ambition. He didn't want small apartments in Queens. He wanted Manhattan, the skyline, the spotlight, the legacy. The Trump Organization, when Donald Trump joined his father's company in the early 1970s, America was changing. Fred Trump's empire was built on safe, steady profits. Donald wanted glamour. In 1971, he took control and renamed the business the Trump Organization. His first major deal was transforming the bankrupt Commodore Hotel into the Grand Hyatt Hotel. A bold move that worked. Trump became known not just as a developer, but as a showman. He turned construction into theater, with his name in gold letters as the headline. In the 1980s, Trump Tower opened on Fifth Avenue. Luxury, glass, and ambition stacked into 58 floors. Reporters called him the king of New York real estate. This was the era that defined his image: confidence, controversy, control. A man who believed that if he wasn't being talked about, he wasn't winning. The business showman by the early 1980s, Donald Trump was a symbol of wealth and risk. Trump Tower stood as a monument to excess. 58 floors of marble, gold, and glass. It wasn't merely a building, it was a reflection of its creator. In 1987, he published The Art of the Deal, a bestseller that defined his public persona. But the 1990s brought turbulence, a real estate crash, rising debts, and bankruptcies. Reporters called it the end of Trump, but they underestimated his talent for reinvention. He shifted his focus from property to persona. If buildings could fall, the brand could live forever. And so, Trump transformed himself. From developer to entertainer, from mogul to myth. Fame, media, and branding. By the early 2000s, Trump was no longer just a businessman. He was a celebrity. In 2004, NBC launched The Apprentice, the reality show that made "You're Fired" a cultural phenomenon. Trump turned his life into primetime television. The show cemented his image as the embodiment of success: confident, commanding, in control. As his fame grew, so did his polarization. To some, he was proof that belief could conquer anything. To others, he was the face of ego and excess. Either way, everyone was talking about him. And for Trump, that meant winning. The Trump brand expanded globally: Istanbul, Manila, Vancouver, Dubai. The man who once dreamed of Manhattan now had his name across the world. Before politics, by 2015, when Donald Trump announced his presidential run, his story was already decades in the making. He wasn't a politician learning to lead us. He was a showman who had learned to command. Every success, every scandal, every camera flash, it all led here. From a restless boy in Queens to a global icon of ambition and controversy, his journey redefined the modern idea of power. Because for Donald Trump, there was always another deal, another challenge, another world to conquer. And long before the politics, there was simply the man.